Looks like it's 1 o'clock. I guess we could get started. Welcome everyone to VCON. It's actually our first official meeting as a working group, so that's great. We said had our fake BOF at the last one, but now we're official, which is great. I'll first note the note well. You've probably, I think most people here are pretty experienced at that. Please follow the note well. Like I said, this is our first working group meeting. Brian and I are the chairs. Brian, unfortunately, won't be with us today, but we'll carry on. The charter has been accepted and is at that URL. So our agenda is mostly to go through the document with Dan today. Any other additions or bashing that we need to do? I think we'll have time for discussion. I think it'll be good to talk about, potential other work and other things. So we can spend some time on that, but okay, I guess we can proceed. Dan?
I'm Dan Petrie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it coming out? Okay. Seemed rather quiet up here. So I updated the draft here just before the blackout period, and the primary changes that I did for this version of the draft was to take Jonathan Rosenberg's contact center use cases and do a gap analysis on that, compared with what we had in the existing solution container definition for JSON, and what he had defined in terms of metadata in his use cases. So next slide. And actually, unfortunately, Jonathan wasn't able to attend either remotely or in person here at this IETF, and so I do have some questions for him, but we'll get to those. But I'm hoping he'll be able to re-engage and maybe answer the questions, and maybe somebody else can answer those on his behalf. So the next 3 slides here are basically content. At the bottom of the page here. There's a link in the bottom there, and I have a table in the GitHub repo that's basically a list of all the metadata that I found in Jonathan's contact center use cases, and I went through and basically divided into went through and assigned to stuff that I thought that covered the functionality. So this first slide here is basically a table of, here's the metadata from the contact center use cases. Here's how it's mapped onto the VCON JSON binding draft. I won't go through this in a whole lot of detail, and because this was the easy stuff, right? This was already covered. And so I'll leave that as exercise for the reader. But again, this link on the bottom of the page here, if you want to go look at the whole gap analysis table that I built that covers all of the, like I said, the next 3 slides. Let's go to the next slide. So here's where here's a set of metadata that I had to add because it was missing. And most of this was pretty straightforward. It was not like we had to restructure anything. It's just another parameter here or there, and figuring out what the relationship was. Because of the structure, we've got VCON, and then within VCONs we have dialogues or parties and things like that. And in some cases, it wasn't always clear for some of the parameters, where the relationship was. And that's actually, that'll be, I'll get to those, the questionable things. These were the more obvious things. And these are the things that I added to the 03 version of the draft. So there was a definition of this concept of a participant UUID, pretty straightforward thing to add to the party object. The participant type, again, added a role parameter to the party object. The personal identifiable information and the scope or the aspect to which the VCON was redacted, that again was just a label, for the redaction object. And where we have this relationship between the current VCON, which is redacted, and a reference to the unredacted version. And I'll get back to this referential, this concept of referring to a VCON from a VCON in a couple slides. But the labeling of the purpose of the redaction was pretty straightforward. So just another parameter. The next two here were a little more substantial in terms of the addition to the VCON object. There was a desire to keep track of the number of holds, in a call center that are occurring, and which party hung up in a call or whatever. And this is actually the latter issue in terms of parties hanging up or joining a call was something that wasn't covered in the VCON, but that requirement had come up. And so what I came up with is an abstraction. And we have these first of all, we have these existing dialogue objects, which are if you have a call recording, it's typically a call is one dialogue object. And you may have multiple calls, that are part of the same conversation. But generally, if you have one, just looking at a specific dialogue, what we were currently capturing was, when did that recording begin and what was the duration of that? And what parties were involved with that dialogue? What we weren't capturing is kind of the individual events that are happening for the specific parties, like, this person joined late, or this person dropped out in the middle call and rejoined, and that kind of stuff. So it took these last two parameters and kind of created a new concept of events within a dialogue. And so I defined a number of events which are relate to a specific party. And so now you can have this, there's a party history array that's part of the dialogue, optional part of the dialogue. And it captures things like party number 3 joined at this timestamp, right? And party number 2 dropped at this timestamp. And in addition to joining and dropping, we also had the concept of going on hold, off hold, mute, and off mute, right? And so we had this concept of events that parties could that we could track in terms of what the participants were doing within a dialogue. So that was probably the only major kind of change to the VCON, and that was on the dialogue object. So for 3.0, these were all additions. And I don't, if people feel there's a better way to do some of these things, I'd love to have feedback of any sort. But these all seem pretty straightforward, and so I put these into the draft and move on. Next slide. This slide is covering stuff that was less clear to me. I understood conceptually these parameters, but what I've been trying to do is look at things not just necessarily from a contact center perspective, but from other use cases, right? And in some cases abstract some things rather than using necessarily contact center terminology or labeling, so that we can cover things from a more general sense. And so my difficulty on this set of parameters was I kind of understood the concept, but not enough to necessarily abstract it, from a contact center perspective. Or I had some questions in terms of the relationship. Is this, like the interaction type? For instance, actually, this one maybe not necessarily, but for the interaction ID rather, it's not clear to me. Is that a VCON scope thing, or is that per dialogue? I suspect it's per dialogue, but there's just, I'd love to have some confirmation in terms of what people think on that. The interaction type was I'm trying to think where this came up. I mean, I guess this did come up in SCC use cases, but I mean, this is a question that I think came up in other contexts as well. The dialogues are labeled, they have a type, right? There's a text type or there's a recording type, right? In terms of most conversations. That doesn't capture things on a more specific labeling, like this was text. Was it email? Was it SMS? Was it web chat? And I'm not sure. It's not clear to me. Do we need to label that? Do people need that? I'm not clear whether that's needed or not. And so I would love to have, kind of feedback or input from people. Do we need to know that? And likewise with like a video recording. Is that a video recording of a conversation, or in some call center context, or the video actually is screen captures of the call agent's screen. What they're doing on their computer while they're interacting with the customer. And so, do we need to label that in some way? The difference, distinguish the difference that this is video from a conference versus screen capture. It's not clear to me we need that level of detail. I would love to hear from anyone as to whether we need to label things more specifically in that context.
Chris went as an individual. I agree. Like it would be hard. Like the definition is sort of the included types within the dialogue, right? Like to try to label that as a specific type of session would be, I've never seen anything like that. So that confuses me as well.
Roy Steele. It doesn't seem like a media type thing. In the use cases document, it seems like it's almost like meant to represent a specific application that was used for the interaction, like a specific vendor's meeting tool or a specific vendor's meeting tool, which included a screen sharing capability. So it's all, if it were, seems like it's almost like a vendor registry type entry for different vendors that implemented this particular scheme based on just reading the use cases document briefly. And I have a general question about the use cases document because I'm new here. So it seems like you've incorporated a lot of the use cases feedback into this draft, and I see the use cases documents expired.
Yes.
It's also not linked in the working group data checker, but I'm not sure exactly the details around that. Could you just kind of give me a summary of like, what's the relationship between these two documents? How do we get here, just briefly?
It was, I think it was linked at one point in time, but I think as it expired, that link went away.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and I asked Jonathan to see if he, if he could at least just refresh it, just so that it hadn't expired. and he's, I think, just, all consumed in something else that he wasn't able to.
Just Jonathan's a good friend on it. First of all, Cullen Jennings worked with Jonathan a bunch, and he still fully supports all his work, wants this moving forward. He's just swamped with both some personal and work things right now. So he didn't even come to this IETF, even though there's great dining and he normally comes.
So yeah, my hope is that he'll get unswamped and we can get that refreshed and some answers to some of these questions.
Thomas Howe. So when we've been using VCONs, we find these problems a bit where you have, a lot of other information that you'd like to be using to increase the accuracy of the VCON. And what we've come to is we've almost in our own heads split the VCON into two parts: the facts part and the opinion part. And we think the facts part is being the dialogue and the parties, and the opinions part being the analysis of what happened, and then the attachments as being the context. So for a lot of what we would do for this would be, we would actually add attachments as a vendor that help us understand how this got to there, and then reference the dialogue if we could. So the reason why we're taking that approach is because the dialogues themselves, if they're facts, it feels like the interaction type may not be as much of a fact, because it's almost as if it's more of an opinion. So here's a real life example of that. So the interaction, I'll pick a better one here. Hold on. No, interaction is fine. So the MIME types of text is clear, but what's the difference between a web chat and an SMS? Right? And it might make a difference to the analysis of what you're trying to do if you knew if it was web chat versus SMS. But the MIME type itself is actually the same in both cases. So that's why the flip may be between, having more of the analysis and attachments be the thing which vendors use to fill out the context. And it keeps us a little bit tighter. Because there are, we think of interaction types at Strawlid as email, video, voice, but these are very media sort of ideas, not where they come from. Does that make sense?
So I guess the way I see it is, if there's some analysis that's dependent upon knowing that this is an SMS versus a web chat, then
Yeah.
I would say, yes, we need some kind of labeling, right?
Yeah.
But, and are you, it's not clear. Are you saying that there is some analysis that's dependent upon on that? Or,
well, at least
not?
the attachments do. And I could give, consent. The consent that we would have gotten from having the conversation itself is very different versus if I had it on a web page or an SMS. Different laws, different regulations entirely. But I want to capture the consent with the conversation, because when customers withdraw the consent, I need to know, what that impact is down my data pipeline. Right, and the kind of consent that you've given indicates the kind of consent that you could be withdrawn. So the consent part we put in the attachments, because it is in a sense independent, and it's a.
Well, I mean, there's a consent label, right? I mean, I think there's I don't know if it's in the dialogue, but I mean, I think we do have the concept of a consent label,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that would be pretty important for that to be a specific parameter. Is that consent label, is that sufficient to disambiguate this? Like, this was a call center, recording played, before the, at the beginning of the call.
Yeah.
Type of consent, right?
Yes, right. Yeah. So what we're doing right now is sufficient in that. So when we put the attachment and reference the dialogue, in that attachment is where we then give our own ideas. Okay, this is where the consent came from. Here's our right.
So well, now, and then once you put things in an attachment, it's kind of opaque, right? I mean,
Yes.
from the protocol
Correct.
perspective, that's an opaque thing, and we
That's
don't,
right.
we don't know anything about that, right?
That's right.
It's-
That's correct.
it's,
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's that. And by the way, and for things like consent, if it's opaque, that could be an issue, right? Right. So I agree. It is.
Yeah.
It can be opaque and unstructured.
Okay. Um,
I think Cody's in the queue.
oh, great. Cody, you there?
There we go. Sorry about that. So I just wanted to give my opinion here because Thomas and I have actually been going back and forth on this quite a bit because we're working on a joint project together. And I wanted to call out a couple of things a bit further down this, specifically the campaign and dialing list line items, as well as the interaction type. We've effectively implemented the exact same fields that Jonathan Rosenberg did, but we're putting them over in the attachments because things like the campaign list, dialing list, and interaction type that the dialogue was sourced from doesn't really, they're necessary for record keeping, but they don't have any bearing on the dialogue itself and the data that we generate from that. Does that kind of make sense? So effectively, we don't care whether it's a video meeting or a video meeting, a phone call, SMS conversation, MMS conversation, or RDC media stream. We treat the dialogues all the same, but we do need to have that reference moving backwards in the attachments.
Okay, and you think that's a better solution than standardizing, a label for campaign and dialing list?
Personally, yes, because the campaign and dialing list labels are very contact center focused. So I guess my point there is we have, I would say, 85% of our traffic that is being recorded as VCONs right now. Those are non-applicable labels to that traffic.
Right. But I mean, a number of these things are optional. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily have to, fill in all the blanks here. But
Yep. I guess my point is I'm not trying to argue for or against. I'm just trying to provide some context of how we're implementing it.
yeah, got it. Cool.
Mhm.
Thanks for your input.
As an individual, I guess I was trying to imagine like a dialogue. Is there a difference between one that's multimodal in terms of like it might have SMS, video call, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, versus which would be hard to label versus something that's like a campaign that, is specifically just, I'm calling you and I want to record the response that I get. And, it's very simplistic. Is that sort of the dichotomy that we're facing here in terms of like interaction type? Because it seems like we're labeling individual parts of the overall dialogue with the important parts, but in terms of like, and I don't know if this is the right word, rendering the entire history of the conversation with the customer, all that matters is, that it was text or video or whatever. I don't know if that helps or confuses.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I guess the different modes would be each a separate dialogue, right? And so, and they potentially, I guess, could be different campaigns and dialing lists each of those. I'm not sure.
Thomas, how again? One of the models we have in our head is not pandering, but like a WebEx session, where in the session itself, you do have multi-modes. You've got video, you've got audio, you've got the chat session there. So you've got 3 different dialogues in that case,
Right.
representing the 3 different things. Now, a question would be, well, how do you relate those 3 together that it was the same WebEx?
Okay.
Right. That's a good question. Right. But that's how it appears in ours.
Okay. That's great. That helps me with the interaction ID, and that it is a dialogue level, and that you potentially would have dialogues with the same campaign interaction ID because they are part of the same video conference, right? Right. And cool. So that's answered number 2.
Rob Shliva. I just have a quick question. Is this a matter of like differentiating between type of the media versus data lineage, which could be kind of externally stored to this?
It's kind of application, right? This is text, but it's text from SMS or email, or it's like, what application did this context did this come out of? Is
Right,
kind
right.
of the interaction type. That I'm not sure that we need to capture that or not. I don't know.
Right, because like there are tools like Open Lineage, for example, that deal with this specific problem of capturing where it's coming from, how it was transformed over time, and so on. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Cool. Thank you. Anybody else in the?
Sorry, one more.
Okay. So I think I got, let's see, we talked about interaction ID. I think I got a solution for that. I'm still a little unclear on interaction type and campaign and dialing list. I think I need some further querying and discussions. And I don't think there was really any issue with the PII and PCI information labeling. I think that was fairly straightforward. All right.
Ori Steele, just picking a bit at the address book, point on the dialing list. Like, is there any additional context that could be shared about that point? Because I do think like one of the interesting things about VCONs is like, how are they spawned and to what sort of other systems are they connected? So an address book or a contact list, pointer here, like I'd really like to understand why address book is listed there, if there's any additional details.
These were names that I was inventing to try to abstract the concept, right? And so these were just like some ideas that I threw out in terms of, is it really, is dialing list, is that the right name for it? Or is there something more abstract concept that's different that may be useful outside of a contact center? This person came out of this call came out of my work contact list or something like that. Is that, I don't know. I just it's trying to think abstractly about this concept from the call center to see if that was maybe something more useful in a more general sense.
Yeah,
that's all. That's where these names came from.
So the thought that I have as I look at, and this could just be your fault that you put the word address book there, but the thought that I have when I see that is like, perhaps when later I'm in my contact management system or my address book as an individual user, perhaps I'm able to find interactions with a specific contact, over time. I guess I just don't understand the dialing list at all.
Yeah, I think from the contact center perspective, the idea is that, this call was generated out of this specific dialing list, and I'm not familiar enough with contact center environment enough to say, how is that different from a campaign, right? Is the campaign not, is there not a one-to-one correlation to campaign and dialing list, or Yes, Tom?
Yeah, so what we do at Strawled is when we generate a VCON, just for the same reasons Ori mentioned, we put into the attachments the system by which we first took it and every system it touches on the way down. And we put in the lead that we received that made us make the call in the first place. That way we can then relate the conversation to the lead. Also to the car that we're talking about, as we sell cars, right? So we can make relationships between the cars and the conversations.
Mhm.
Again, what keeps occurring to us is all these ideas of that we have are our layering of information onto the same conversation. The conversation itself seems to be pretty invariant, but we seem to catch the things that we want to track through the attachments. So in this case, if there was a dialing list, you would put the dialing list identifier or the campaign identifier in the VCON.
Mhm.
And you would do that so you could then, after the fact, take all the VCONs from that campaign
Right.
as a block and analyze them.
Yeah.
Right. But we do that as an attachment because it's a context for us, not an analysis. Like we make a pretty big distinction between attachments and analyses based upon who's making that. Like there's like analyses almost always have an opinion, and attachments almost always have a relative factual context. for
Can
us.
I just ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Because I thought there was a difference between like the UUID that represented who wrote a text message or, whatever, versus like campaign and dialing lists, which are sort of a campaign specific idea.
Yeah, just
Am I misinterpreting that?
Yes, just to be clear about that. So we put all of we aggregate the information about the conversation in the VCON. That way, it's a fact. We've created the fact. We can export it and keep it, as forever. So we use the UUID of the VCON to be its own unique thing. That's what that thing is forever. For any other foreign key, which that for us would be a foreign key, it's an attachment. Foreign keys are attachments. That makes sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So I understand, like I said, the campaign, the dialing list concept. I guess what I'm hearing is those make sense as a label. I think they probably belong to the campaign belongs to the dialogue. The dialing list belongs to the party. Is that right? That's the relationship that we have here. And I'm still finding myself wondering if there's something more abstract that, outside of the call center, but I think we can work that out over time. So I think I'll take that we'll wait for comments or something else to come up before I do, spend any more time on trying to abstract that. So let me think here. So I think interaction ID, I think everything except for interaction type, which I think I'm still undecided on. Go ahead, Ori.
All right, Ori Steele. I searched the use cases draft for the dialing list reference, and I think the thing that was throwing me off is just the telephony only sort of concept of dialing list. I mean, this is really the list of all recipients for a given initiator of a conversation
So
for a purpose, and the campaign is like the purpose, but this list, you wouldn't want to pass that around by value all the time. It could be gigantic.
exactly.
And it is an attribute on the party, but it's like an attribute on the party that is, I guess the confusing part is like the dialing list is in a sense a representation of all of the other side of the conversation almost, like, or potentially if you started a VCON, you'd start with sort of a full list of people you wanted to dial or to email. And then over time, if you were aggregating everything, you would get through enough of that you had full coverage on the list. Ideally, that would mean that you covered everything, and maybe there was a good interaction for every single entity on the list. So I think the word dialing list is a problem because it's sort of binding only to the concept of telephones, but this is actually like more of a sort of marketing list or like customer interaction list or something.
Target list.
Yeah, I think
Target, yeah.
of the things I threw out there, I think contact list is a more appropriate term than dialing list. Yeah, I agree. Thank you. So, and I don't know. Likewise, any thoughts on name for campaign? Is that reasonable to use as such? Okay,
That's a pretty common name, I think.
all right, cool. So I think we got through 4 of those 5, and at least, and the 5th one is, I think we need to do a little more exploring on the interaction type before I feel like that's settled. Any other thoughts or comments? Next slide. So what's left to do? Quite a bit. I mean, there's just a ton of to-dos in the draft. So I know it's nowhere close to being done. So this was, the edits in this version were largely gap analysis on the contact center stuff from Jonathan. I think, I kind of felt like what was also in scope is emergency services and messaging. And we don't have kind of use cases for those. However, it's just, it's having lunch with Rowan today and Rowan May. And I think that, I think it's reasonable for me to go through Mimi content, the Mimi content draft, go through that and look at all the metadata in there that makes sense for wrapping up, kind of a range of a text-based messaging conversation, and kind of include the metadata to be able to capture all of that. And I don't think we need a use case document for that. I think we've got a spec and we've got a data model that I think is reasonable for us to be able to encapsulate it in a VCON. And it looks like Colin has a
I'm going to
comment.
skip the queue. It sounds like a great idea. But I would say that beyond what's in Mimi content, you also need the membership of the group because that's not there. So you sort of need to know. That's almost certainly something you want to know in this stuff is who got added to the group, who was, when people entered and exited the group, which you won't get out of Mimi content.
The dynamics part of it, not just a static snapshot.
As it changed, yeah, at any point, to be able to figure out in a point in time, this message, who was in the group at this point in time of this message, and then who was at, at any time it changed. And another, I was just going to say the other model you might sort of look at for a little bit of information is XMPP. I mean, that's obviously old messaging content, but it's much closer to what is actually used in most of the places we probably want to use VCON than the Mimi content draft. So it seems like it might be a slightly simpler and also more realistic starting point than Mimi content, but both sound great.
I think we're not far off from some of a lot of the concepts in Mimi already. I think we've got a fair amount. I don't think it's a big gap there.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. No, I completely agree.
Tom?
So I'd like to ask a question of the audience here. We had talked to Jonathan previous to his submission of his use case and requirements internet drafts. And we had said at the time, and I agreed at the time, and I still do, I think, that having a smaller use case document was the right first step. Just not make it too big. Contact center, that's going to be the right scope for what we're talking about. I just want to ask it one more time, just make sure that no one's feelings have changed. That in the work that we're doing at Strawlid, a lot of the use cases we're doing are around customer privacy and consent and AI and generative AI cases around conversations. And I wonder if that's not worth a requirements ID or not. And maybe just to see how far off we are from it, I've tried to keep track of what I'm seeing, and I don't think we're very far off from it. So I'm not screaming that I think we're going to go really off the rails for what we're trying to do with it, but it is the major use case we have. So,
So
any ideas on that?
I was actually going to ask a broader question of, we have a number of use case and requirements document. There's also use case and requirements in this draft itself. What does the working group want to do? Do we want to continue to have all those? I mean, I think there is a lot of use cases that people are talking about. So we have quite a number of them. So, I just wanted to ask that more general question, how organized we wanted to be about the use case and requirements going forward.
Yeah, I'm looking for guidance. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, just to, I'll further ask a further question on that, if I may. I mean, I'm happy to pull out the use cases and just say that, we looked at, and name them rather than describe them as use cases that were considered in that. I mean, is that what people feel we should do? Any?
People can respond. I sort of like that idea to keep that separate from the core, definition of the objects.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there mainly just from historical perspective. I just, I needed something to justify the rest of the document when there was nothing else.
Right. Understood.
Ori?
Go ahead, Ori.
Ori Steele. I queued to pick at some of the security pieces in the current document. So, like, I like documents that are to the extent that you can layer them and they have a relationship. And one of the things that sort of concerns me about the current document is, like, I know that there are good use cases for, like, internalizing some of the security components into a conversation, but, like, we're talking about Mimi, we could be talking about MLS sort of more generally. And I think one of the things that's a bit confusing, for implementers is, like, if I'm in MLS, why am I talking about JSON web signatures for, encoding, Mimi content? And I understand, like, there's a very big difference between, like, this is the crypto layer that secured the original session. This is the crypto layer that's securing my sort of transcription of the session and all these other details. But I wonder if there isn't an opportunity to split, use cases and securing the data model and the data model from each other. And if folks might, have an easier time implementing the data model and then have an easier time implementing securing it, and potentially have an easier time sort of understanding whether this is a thing they should do if they could read a use cases. So I know it's extra work, potentially for Murray, but I like separate documents, and I think it's easier to review smaller documents that are narrowly focused. So when I was reviewing the attachments piece in particular, one of the things I was sort of not happy about in how I was trying to map it was, like, I want to do the security in attachments. I don't want to do the security in the VCON layer. Like, I couldn't figure out how to make use of that particular layer of the data structures. And it's possible that I just didn't understand from reading it.
I'd love to take the time and talk to you about that and better understand, your point here. Definitely, I think, and that's coming up on a slide in terms of the reference. We referencing VCONs from VCONs, and you have this kind of hierarchy. I think, for instance, I need to better familiar myself with selective disclosure, Jose. I think there may be that may be a better or complementary solution here. I don't know enough about it yet to be able to judge that, but I know that it's we have not implemented any of the the VCONs referencing VCONs yet, so I don't have any good experience with that. in terms of, what, on the issues of what that are there, and as well as just the, the security aspect of, when I'm, I sign, somebody signs this piece, somebody else signs that piece, and, you've got, do we want to duplicate data? And, there's some issues there. And I think that it warrants some more research. And that's actually on the next slide, but let me go through this stuff here first. Talk about messaging. The other area, which is the use case I think was listed in the charter, is emergency services. And there, I'm not sure. Maybe there's a draft that I can look at. I'll have to see if I can corner Brian and get some input on him or suggestions on him there, just to look and see if there is, something that documents the metadata that might be specific to emergency services kind of centers that I can look at to do some gap analysis on that kind of stuff. As I said, there's a list of to-dos in the draft that I need to address. There's a bunch of missing examples that I need to fill in, we'll do so. That we've got some working code, and actually there's a bunch of working code out there now. I think there's this stuff is actually starting to get deployed in real call centers and call services. So it's kind of cool to get it out there, and not a lot of feedback of, well, this doesn't work. Got some missing things that aren't there yet, but you had some really good feedback, from people really using this stuff. Next slide. So this is what I was saying, is these referential concepts where we refer to groups of VCONs and create an amendment of a VCON or a redaction of a VCON. This we haven't implemented, haven't any real experience with it. Like I said, I think I need to look at some things like the SD Jose to see if there's something that maybe makes more sense than what we've described in the draft here. So there's some work that needs to be done there. And likewise, we've implemented JWS and JWE, and they work, right? But it's pretty mechanical, but don't have any experience with really using that in a production type of environment or in real use cases, other than just conceptually of it. And so I'm not confident with the solution yet. Just saying that it needs more feedback on things. Next slide. Yeah, give VCON a try if you haven't. I guess what it leads me to then is just kind of the next question is, I asked that of my chair, is this something that we can feel it is solidified enough that we can adopt as a work group draft?
Yeah, it'd be good to get feedback from the group on that. I think we talked about a few things. One is figuring out what we do with use case and requirements. I sort of resonate with Ori's comment about the security, and I think you sort of addressed it with, the JWS and JWE, and, there probably is some more exploratory. I think we need to make sure there's folks that can take on that work to do those things. But so I don't know, any thoughts on adoption? How are we feeling? I know a lot of work has gone into this so far. Do we feel like we need to fix any of those things before, or we can fix them afterwards? Yeah, I think
I think the alternative document's much better. We should adopt it instead. No, I mean, like what are we like? I mean,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
we should adopt.
right.
I haven't even read it. Okay, so let me be fair. But I think we should adopt it.
Yeah, I just wanted to state explicitly some of the things that we said during the meeting that I think we will need to make sure we're fixing. But yeah, can I'm getting sort of a rough consensus in the room. Obviously, we will need to ask on the list as well.
Yeah. So stepping in for Murray, you've got to ask on the list.
Right.
It seems like this is a reasonable starting point, but you should confirm it on the list.
Yep.
And also, I was looking at the milestones, and it would be good to kind of take another look at those in the data tracker. You can update them at any point in time. It sounds like there may be some possibility to also confirm some updates to your milestones and your timeline also on the list. So I'd be in favor of all of those things, but
Yep.
this is Murray's show, so hopefully he likes what I'm saying.
Oh, thanks for stepping in. Cool. I think, yeah, we will do that on the list for sure.
That's all I had.
What's that? I'm
I
sorry.
said that's all I had.
Yep. Any other discussion for today?
Just a point of information, we are having the third annual VCON hackathon this weekend, and the goal is redaction and detection. And so as Dan points out that we don't have a lot of experience with it, we're about to get a lot of experience with it.
Mhm.
So, and the point behind the hackathon, so people knows, is so they can take a VCON that has personal information in it and then redact it. And that's one part of the hackathon. The other part is the opposite. Was there any personal information into the VCON that you just received? And then we'll have a smackdown at the end to see who was best.
Great.
And that's why in this hackathon in IETF, we were doing that fake conversation
Mhm.
because we needed fake conversations to redact. So
Is that here in Australia or?
we did that in Australia. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. The hackathon is at TADHack, which is co-located with Enterprise Connect.
Got it.
They're announcing the winners of it on Tuesday in a session. at
Oh, is
Enterprise
that in
Connect
Florida?
in Florida.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Sorry. I thought you meant
Yeah.
it was in
And
Australia.
I even think there's coverage with the analysts too. So
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. See you on the list.
Small amount of minutes for you in the data tracker.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
If you want any of them, but they're there.
Okay.
And on the regular session, so.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Yeah. How can I be Murray?
I just had lunch with Rowan May, and he said that if you feel that you need help because Brian's not available or whatever.
Yeah.
That Rowan would.
Oh, what do you? Okay. That's great to know. Yeah. Yeah, I think Brian isn't traveling as much.
Yeah, no, I
so
mean,
that
he
might.
wouldn't be in person.
Right.
Best will be remote.
I can.
And I mean, I knew that when he.
I can let Brian know about that and see what he feels about that. That would be great. Thank you.